and see the title of this message is The Six Commandments of Inclusive Community, 5 through 10. We'll review quickly last week, 5, 6, and 7, and then go forth with 8 through 10 today. The title of this message is Let Go of Your Ego. Let go of our ego. Would you pray with me? Lord, you have made us for yourself, and your hearts are restless until they rest in you. May those hearts find rest in all these moments of worship still to come. Amen. You might remember that popular TV commercial. A waffle pops up out of a toaster. Two children reach up to grab it, and they cry to one another, "Let go of my ego, let go of my ego." Today, we conclude our Lenten Let Go and Let God series on the 10 Commandments with the community commandments, numbers 5 through 10. Commandments that pop up out of life's toaster and shout out to us, let go of your ego. Let go of your ego. How to let go of our ego that may self-promote us or may self-dismiss us. How to let go of our ego and stay right-sized in this pandemic world. Staying right-sized, that constant reconciliation with God's world can be had with a world beginning to open up around us. Commandments 5 through 10, right-sizing self and reconciling our relationships, human relationships at least, as a direct reflection of our relationship with God in Commandments 1 through 4. So let's take a look at the right-sizing and reconciling dynamics of inclusive community made possible through Commandments 5 through 10. Let's take a look on the next slide at letting go of our ego. I will just touch on these 3 commandments again covered last Sunday. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. And it all hinges upon and begins with the importance of honoring our parents, all our forebears, in fact, painful though that can sometimes be. Commandments 5 through 7 hinge on that 5th commandment. Bring up the 2nd column. And as many of you can see by the 2nd column now before you, by failing to honor our parents and our heritage, honor in the Hebrew meaning not obey, but to consider heavily. By failing to consider heavily our heritage, we either overtly reject or covertly dismiss our God, our help in ages past. And then we see the ripple effect of Commandment 5 for Commandments 6 and 7. When we do not honor, when we do not consider heavily our help in ages past, and it may not have seemed so helpful at the time, but there is no hope then for years to come. Because in the overt killing off of our heritage, we may then feel free to kill others. And in the covert dismissal of our parentage, we can then adulterate even the most intimate relationship. And so in letting go of our ego, we let God right-size us through these commandments. Right-size us for right relationships, not rejecting overtly, not dismissing covertly. Let God right-size us to constantly reconcile us, as you see at the top there, in inclusive community. Let's move now to Commandments 8 through 10 on the next slide. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet. And I won't go through the list there. You can see that. And you can see in some of the references there, very ancient context involved. But as for more letting go of our ego here, as with commandments 5 through 7, each of these commandments is meant to counter overt rejections as well as covert dismissals. Second column. Overt rejection of neighbor, made manifest in exploitation of neighbor. In community, that exploitation is made manifest in a legion of ways, in structural violence. All the isms, racism, classism, sexism, ableism, exploitation defined not as how am I useful to others, but how are they useful to me? We are called to let go of our ego of how neighbors can be overtly useful to us. And it's about a covert dismissal, letting go of neighbors, which leads us to objectify them. To dismiss, to objectify, translation to keep them distant from us. Socially distant. Now more than ever we feel it. We can dismiss and distance human pain. We can make the subjects objects, steal justice from them, bear false witness against them, and you know how they are. Covet what we and our wealthier neighbors have. And coveting in Hebrew is an act of seizing, not just of feeling. It's the covet means to seize. All easier to do when the they are kept they, distant from us. Less subjects and more objects. And we relate to them less in the day today. Here in observing commandments 8 through 10, we let go of rejection of neighbor overtly, here via exploitation, and covertly by dismissal, in this case, objectification. And we let God right-size our egos into a community of constant reconciliation. And finally, the next slide, we get an overview of the whole series. The next slide about the 10 commandments, let go and let God, as we bring this series to a close. It's a movement of the Spirit I personally had discovered and wanted to share with you beyond the thou shalt nots found in most of the 10 commandments, a movement of letting go and letting God. And you see here on the left column, our one exclusive God, not a God who excludes, but one God above all God, from one God exclusive to unroll the second column, to our community inclusive, our inclusive God. And you see from today's overview, the letting goes in yellow, the letting God's in white. I can send this later to any who might want it. You just leave a message privately to Claire in the chat if you'd like for a copy of this slide. But right now, take about 30 seconds to take these 10 commandments in, how we are called to let go and how we are called to let God. Take a few seconds. Now, letting go and letting God are good as far as they go for our individual discipleship. As far as they go. We who are relatively secure and well-heeled in our world, we can easily hide out in lofty concepts and principles. And yet, as we can see from the top left-hand side, look at those white letters on the top left-hand side. As we can see from the top left and from our congregational charge, these commandments serve our God of Exodus liberation for the enslaved in our world. Our God is a God of liberation, and God introduces God's self before the Ten Commandments in this way. So in honor of the God of Exodus liberation that we serve through our congregational charge, let me close this Lenten series by outlining how today's commandments, 8 through 10, for example, play out for those considered least in the world, those who are waiting for their Exodus experience, those who are waiting for being freed. Especially in this time of COVID-19, when we interact with the stranger less and less and are more prone to forget that our God indeed is a God of Exodus liberation. Thanks, Aidan. You can drop the slide now. We have heard in many ways this past week of deeply embedded discrimination in our world. Against Asian Americans, certainly, and against migrants from the South. Their desperation driving thousands upon thousands of these neighbors to a hope for a better and safer life in our country. And so then, how do commandments 8, 9, and 10, stealing, bearing false witness, coveting, how do they speak to us about our immigrant neighbors, about that Exodus liberation, these commandments about stealing, false witness, coveting? Let me respond to that question with 3 questions about each command. When we declare someone overtly as illegal and as alien, are we not stealing from them a large chunk of their humanity? And are we honoring immigrants' desires to live among us by bearing false witness against their humanity in these ways? By overtly rejecting them and then exploiting them as illegal and alien, or covertly dismissing and objectifying them as undocumented persons. Even though well over 95% of migrants show up to bear their true witness in immigrant courts when they are called to appear, how do we bear false witness? By objectifying them. And as far as coveting goes, are we honoring immigrants' desires to live among us by thinking, oh, they are coming here simply because they covet what we have? When what the vast majority of immigrants covet, if you will, is subsistence, even survival. For if we cannot let go of overtly rejecting and covertly dismissing our immigrant neighbors as human as the rest of us are, depicting them as thieves, as liars, as greedy, by objectifying them as illegal and alien and undocumented, what does that exploitation and objectification then say about our humanity? What does that say about letting go of our national ego? To let God right-size us through Jesus the Christ, to reconcile the world entire around us. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here in many ways. For our rightful treatment of our immigrant friends is but one example, though, of letting go of our ego and letting God bring inclusive community in our world. And so I want to leave you today with one question for your discipleship, based on our understanding of our God of Exodus liberation. One question which I will ask again at the end of worship today. What relationships might you be overtly rejecting and covertly dismissing today? What relationships may you be overtly rejecting and covertly dismissing today? Relationships that would reconcile you to your world all around. Think about it. Amen.